Welcome to Very British Futures, the podcast that's taking a look back at some of the most interesting science fiction television produced in the United Kingdom. I'm Gareth Preston. We're staying in the 80s today, 1987 to be precise, where Chris Boucher, a writer already known to fans of Doctor Who and Blake Seven, successfully pitched a series set in the near future, where humanity has now made the inner solar system the new frontier. But new opportunities for science and industry also mean fresh ways to commit crimes. Today we're talking about Star Cops. But before we go on, a couple of listeners have been in touch with additional information for previous episodes. My friend Martin Hearn told me that Star Maidens was definitely shown in the Granada ITV region because, unlike myself, he had a clear memory of watching the show and recognising Gareth Thomas, who was by then more famous for Blake Seven. And DQ Test 2020 posted on the blog that The Tripods was co-produced with the Channel 7 network in Australia, where it was aired as part of the children's weekend TV lineup. Channel 7 held back the first series in order to run both seasons back to back. Now, joining me, wearing natty blue jumpsuits and floating around in CSO, are three guests who all nominated this programme to discuss when I was first planning this series: Peter Grehen, Kevin Hiley, and Dr. Rebecca Wray. Peter Grehen is a writer of science fiction and has lectured on science fiction at the University of South Wales's Science and Science Fiction degree course. Rebecca is a mental health mentor and a lecturer in psychology. Kevin is an experienced video editor and graphic designer, as well as a short film maker. Star Cops was broadcast on BBC Two between July and August 1987. It was, as I said, the brainchild of Chris Boucher, who originally pitched it to Radio 4 as a series. When that was turned down, he felt there was nothing to lose in retooling it as a TV show, and was rewarded with a commission. Boucher initially wanted to write the whole season himself, but the pressures of time obliged him to bring in Philip Martin to write 2 and John Colley another 3. Due to an electrician's strike at the BBC, the initial 10-episode run was cut to 9, losing one of Philip Martin's episodes, Death on the Moon. Christopher Baker and Graham Harper directed roughly half the season each. The producer was Evgeny Gridnev, whose CV included Blot on the Landscape, as well as script editing experience on several BBC period dramas, including The House of Elliot. Series regulars included David Calder as Nathan Spring, Eric Ray Evans as David Farrou, Linda Newton as Pal Kenzie, and Trevor Cooper as Colin Davis. Star Cops was released in 3 VHS volumes by BBC Video, and the complete series was briefly available on DVD thanks to Network Video, and can now be streamed on BritBox. In 2018, Big Finish launched an audio continuation featuring Calder, Cooper and Newton. So, Peter, would you like to describe the setup of Star Cops for people who don't know it?
I'd be happy to, Gareth. The year is 2027, and mankind has started colonising and exploiting the solar system. But wherever there are people, there's crime. And where there's crime, you're going to need a police force. When British Police Chief Superintendent Nathan Spring reluctantly accepts the promotion to Commander of the International Space Police Force, the ISPF, nicknamed the Star Cops, it soon becomes apparent he was correct to be reluctant. Not only does he have to turn the 20 part-time volunteers into a full-time professional police force, weeding out corrupt officers, recruiting new staff while expanding the authority of the force to all the human habitats, he also has to cope with the unforgiving hazards of space. As Spring says, you leave Earth and anything you forget to bring with you will kill you. Anything you do bring with you, which doesn't work properly, will kill you. When in doubt, just assume everything will kill you.
Yes, that's a setup. So a good place to start, I think, would be how did we all first encounter Star Cops? Would you like to start, Rebecca?
Well, I first encountered it when I met Kevin about 2009, and he was a sci-fi fan, and he asked me if I'd seen Star Cops, and I said I've never even heard of it. And he's like, "Oh, I've got it on DVD," so he lent it to me, and I really loved it, and I've now seen it 3 times over. Of course, Kevin found out after lending it to me how much the DVD's going for, and he says he's never lending it out ever again. We were both quite horrified at how much the DVD costs. It's like hundreds of pounds.
It is quite amazing how that has become so sought after. Hopefully, BritBox will bring that down and make it more affordable.
Yeah.
How about yourself, Kevin?
I did see at least one episode when it was first broadcast. Some of the space scenes from Paranoid Games and Trivial Pursuits did burn themselves into my memory, but I don't recall watching much of it, though, even if I saw any other episodes. At the time, I would have been just still too young to really get much from the show. I doubt I understood what was going on. I would have been, about 8 at the time. So, yeah, it probably wouldn't have appealed to me all that much.
And yourself, Peter?
Well, unfortunately or fortunately, I am old enough to have been able to watch the whole series and enjoyed it. Anything science fiction at the time, I was on the BBC or anywhere on television, I would watch, and I got hooked on Star Cops straight away. It just seemed like a winning formula to me because I loved detective series, police series, and I loved science fiction, and it was just combining 2 of my favorite things. So I watched the whole series. I was eagerly anticipating a sequel, which never came, and I've always been disappointed about that.
It is just watching it recently. Yeah, like we've only just begun, and it's very nicely set up for a second season. We'll probably move on to pondering on what a second season would have been like later on. Similar to you, Peter, I watched it myself the first time round. I can remember it being previewed in Starburst magazine, and the preview was actually a bit sniffy, if I remember, written by Paul Mount, and sort of said, "Oh, it'll just be around for a couple of seasons, and then everyone will forget about it. Someone will champion it." I did enjoy it, but I can't remember being really sort of gripped by it. I think it's a show I've appreciated more in the years later. Years later, I came across the free VHSs, at a second-hand bookstall, and it was re-watching it there. I thought, this is actually a lot better than I remembered.
It probably requires a certain maturity to appreciate it, perhaps. It's not the sort of science fiction a youngster might take to straight away because it hasn't got the usual whiz-bang ray guns and potential alien attacks and things like this. It's a bit more sophisticated, and it's a bit more real. It was only predicted for a few relatively few decades into the future, and when things would naturally progress as people saw it with the space race of the time, which unfortunately never happened. But it was extrapolating that. What sort of admin problems are you going to have? What sort of criminal problems are you going to have? As an experiment in thinking about it is a very clever idea.
Yeah, but it's part, as you say, the strengths are the sort you appreciate better on the repartee. The dialogue is excellent. It carries on. I mean, Critchboucher has written all these splendidly bitey, witty exchanges between Avon and Blake and the rest of the crew on that show. And his Doctor Who stories also have pretty good, not quite realistic dialogue sometimes, but very memorable kind of repartee between characters, and Star Cops carries that on.
I was just going to say Nathan Spring has some brilliant lines, like where he has the exchange with the commander of the American space station. He says, "My country, right or wrong?" And the commander says, "Well, there are worse philosophies," and he says, "Yes, and most of them start with that." So I think they were very, very, very clever lines there, especially with Nathan Spring.
I was just saying, I watched the Cult of Star Cops as well, and they were talking about the dialogue in that, saying it was really important for them to have the characters be a bit coarse in their language and stuff, because they wanted it so grounded in reality. And saying this is how people would talk.
Yeah, and in some ways, I think that quest for reality, I think people sometimes perhaps misunderstood it. One of the frequent criticisms, in fact, before I got to what do you think about the look of Star Cops generally, the production style of it?
Looking at it in different ways, if we're going from a design perspective, the look of the show is actually, I think, really rather impressive. This is a show where they've really sat down and thought about how a show should look, that's set in the near future in a microgravity environment. But of course, you're then balancing that against an 80s BBC show with a budget that's probably not much different to something like Juliet Bravo. It's there's only so much you can get away with. There is, obviously the model work in Star Cops is 35mm film, but I'm just trying to, is there any actual footage of actors that's shot on film?
I don't think any of the actors are shot on film.
It's entirely video. Yeah.
Yes, because Boucher wanted all the Earth stuff done on film and the space stuff done on video, and Vegney, that guy, the producer, basically vetoed that and said, no, it's all being done on video.
Well, I do think there is that one sequence in the centrifuge, which they must have done at like an Air Force base or something, when Nathan's doing his stats on film. But that might be the only thing I can think of.
I have a feeling you're right. Yeah, I think there could be practical reasons why they couldn't get a video camera into there.
I know they went to a lot of trouble to get it right. They even had an American astronaut whose name I can't remember.
Peter Conrad.
Pete Conrad.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's going to be a big help with my memory. He was very impressed, and I think it comes across that a lot of it was very good. So the impression is generally good. I think where it was let down a bit, they had a conflict with the style of the two directors.
Christopher Baker and Graham Harper.
They were, I think they had different approaches. One wanted it dark, another one wanted it super lit. And there was a bit of a conflict there and a discontinuity, perhaps. Although, having said that, it didn't strike me as a particularly significant thing. I mean, I suppose if you look at each episode in its own context, you just accept it the way it is. But a consistent approach to that would have been good. In terms, well, I don't know if anybody else has got an opinion on that in general, or what they thought of the sets and things.
I agree with Peter on that. Actually, if you watch them, it isn't that noticeable between episodes. I mean, you can tell a Graham Harper episode because he has a very unique and idiosyncratic way at the Beaver at the time of lighting things. He loves his purple light,
Yeah.
So there's that, but yeah, I don't feel there's like a massive mismatch between episodes. And when it comes to it, I do wonder how they must have felt when learning what we were going to have to do for this show. I mean, if you tell a director, I want to accurately portray life in space, and if they have a grasp of what that entails, you're going to see the colour drain from their faces. It's a heck of an ask. You're going to need a floor full of atypical sets. You're going to need harnesses ready for actors. You're going to need to use chroma key everywhere. You're going to need a horde of floor assistants dangling weightless objects on fishing lines and what have you. And so it's it must have been, from what I remember. I mean, Graham Harper's done sci-fi. He's done two very good Doctor Who episodes of this, so he's got some grounding. But he's probably still considered the whippersnapper at this point. He's still quite young in his career. Whereas I know Chris Baker's, he's an old hand. He's been a director a long time at this point. But I don't think he's ever done any sci-fi, so
no.
It might have been quite a steep learning curve getting through all the technicals for him. And it just happens that the first two episodes are probably two of the most technically complex.
I mean, what makes it especially hard is that we're dealing with sci-fi in the near future. in space, not in the distant future where artificial gravity has been invented, and therefore they're trying to convey this sense of realism with floating aboutness, which never really quite comes off, but you forgive them for it because they're doing their best and they can't work miracles. So it's that suspension of disbelief, along with the suspension of actors, I suppose, that you're trying. They can't get absolutely perfectly right, and you have to, if you're going to buy into a series like this, you have to be forgiving of those sorts of things.
And the time constraints as well, because it comes up again and again when I've been reading up about watching interviews, and they're saying doing the anti-gravity stuff, this harnesses and things just took up so much time. They were running out.
They do very awful for taking up an entire day.
So they quickly had to establish with the moving to moon base.
Yeah, I definitely got that feeling that they had to get to the moon base, and even there they weren't realistically depicting the gravity on the moon base, but it could have sort of fallen into the background while they got on with the story. I mean, it's not something you want to get too hung up on, really, if you're trying to convey an interesting story.
With the moon base especially, I mean, portraying 1/6 gravity is actually harder than portraying microgravity, because normal human locomotion just doesn't work on the moon. So everyone will be doing these sort of lolloping hops around to get around the base. And even if you did portray that accurately, no one watching would take it seriously. They'd laugh at it.
Yes.
So I think they did exactly the right thing on the moon and just not address it. More than the visuals, really, my worst complaint is the poor sound mix. I mean, for reasons I don't understand. I mean, you've got issues with obtrusive set noise still on there. You've got incidental music that's too loud. And then you've got these sequences where you've got multiple strings of dialogue that are being spoken on top of one another. And well, the net result is you can't make out what either conversation's about.
Yeah, it was particularly bad when they had news broadcasts going in the background, and you could hardly hear what the actors are saying.
Yeah, that's the problem, because I don't think I'd want to show the first 1 or 2 episodes to someone, because I'd be worried about that because I think that's kind of off-putting, and it does make it a bit hard going at first, but then they kind of phase that out after a while, and it just becomes normal again. I think they were doing that.
It also comes across as a bit, I was just going to say, it comes across as a bit amateurish, really, somehow, that they're not doing their job right, somehow.
I mean, I'm assuming it's hearing the sort of multiple levels of dialogue. I think it's maybe they're trying to capture the feeling of when you're listening to comms chatter in actual contemporary space missions, when it's like lots of people talking over each other, and it's like a bit of a cacophony. But if it was the reason, it's interesting, but it just does not.
I guess the equivalent of that would be if you're filming, I don't know, some drama or something, and there's a scene in a taxi, and all you can hear is the the CB radio thing, chattering away constantly. I think that drives you nuts. TV show.
It doesn't explain the poor overlay of incidental music, though. That's not something to expect from the BBC of that type at all.
No, that is a bit peculiar, and there's no, like you say, there's no clear reason why that happens.
I think I'm just going to have to assume they were really rushed.
It's our old enemy time again.
I do get the sense from the people actually working on the show, they all wanted this to work. They were passionate about it. I think it was just the high-ups who had very different plans for it.
I think the way it's written, I can understand why, because you've got a series called Star Cops, and it, in a way, you want to establish all that weightlessness and that working in space in your first episode. It's almost like a sort of statement of intent to some extent. I think if we'd gone straight to the moon, it would have become a bit more science fiction-y from the get-go. I think in terms of just looking at it from a writing point of view, I think it is nicely structured that he's in space for a couple of episodes, and then we sort of become more established on the moon. But yeah, that means that first episode has got a lot of work to do, and unfortunately, to me, I'm watching it again recently. I don't think the weightlessness is that. In my mind, it was a lot worse, actually. I seem to remember. I mean, yes, it's obvious how the trick is being done. That Kirby wire look is there, but in terms of it's actually, I think it's fairly well done.
I know Eric and David, they did sort of conspire amongst themselves on how to, try and get the most they could out of the sort of the fake weightlessness, because you've got those scenes and they're quite good actually. I mean, you can see that it's clearly being faked, but you've got David Calder just making a hash up of his movements and just looking really uncomfortable and always lurching at an angle, and just Eric just looking just really natural with it all and just normal. But that and that does convey a sense of realism, because that's what people actually go through when they first go to space. People have been there for a day, they just can't orient themselves properly, they keep banging into things, and but after a couple of months up there, they can get around with the push of a fingertip. They just come very graceful. So I quite like that they did that, and of course it got them off the harnesses, which meant they could get more recorded.
I think you make a very good point, Gareth, that by putting the sort of weightless bits in the first episode, you're establishing it as real science fiction as opposed to far future science fiction. And had they gone straight to the moon, then we're already looking at something that looks a bit like artificial gravity and isn't necessarily that realistic. Whereas the way how you describe it is that it's set the scene. We're still in space. We haven't advanced technologically that far. We're getting into space more easily, but trying to cope with no gravity is still a big issue.
And regarding the lighting, I can see both sides of it. I mean, I can understand why Graham Harper wants it to look quite dramatic. And it looks quite dramatic and film noirish. We get a lot more shadows, a lot more just, in a way, realistic illumination that's just coming off the monitors and torches. But on another level, more realistically, and in that quest for realism, they're going to have the lights on. And it's going to be a fairly brightly lit. If you look inside the International Space Station or any other, it doesn't look moody, and it's all very brightly lit. There was I don't know if any of you saw a series on Netflix called Night Flyers that was on.
Yeah, I started watching that, yes.
And it was really beginning to annoy me that it's all set on this futuristic spaceship. How dimly lit that spaceship is. Everyone just forget the light switches in this spaceship. Everything is so sort of like gloomy, and it's like a big Gothic castle, which could have been what they were looking for, but it became distracting.
Yeah. Also, it's difficult to see sometimes. If you're missing out on some of the detail, again, that might be part of the reason they can get away with a lot more with the set design. But when it's gloomy and you're struggling to see the action, that again is a bit irritating.
In terms of the design, probably my criticisms aren't so much for the space stations and the moon base, which I think there's good practical reasons why they have a bit of a prefabricated look to them, because I think real ones would. I think where the show perhaps lets itself down a bit more is the scene set on Earth.
Yeah.
Where apparently, according to BBC designers, we have lost all sense of taste.
Yes.
Altogether. That opening police station set that we're in, and everything just looks hideously chunky and really it's not 80s, it's bad 80s. Design that.
I guess they're they're taking 80s designs around them and just trying to extrapolate how it would, evolve, and it evolves into something truly horrible, it seems.
On the model effect, I think the model effects stand up pretty well. I mean, as soon as Space 1999, I think, is the obvious comparison between them.
Yeah.
And actually, the model work looks pretty good, and the designs of the ships, again, you can see they've been doing their research into what NASA were thinking of, but everything having that slightly everything seems to be built out of these sort of octagonal Tetra Pak sort of modules.
And scaffolding.
Yeah, it's the one thing that is evident even from the first episode is whereas the rest of the production may have been having struggles, the actual model filming work that hits the ground running. Well, you've got it's Mike Kelt, isn't he, who's heading the special effects, if I remember right, and he's he's a Doctor Who and Black 7 veteran, and he's gone to film. He's gone on to found a major effects house, hasn't he, Arton, who do feature films.
Oh, interesting.
So, there's clearly a lot of talent there. And you've got Robin Lobb, who did all the visual effects on the tripods, and he's probably the best visual effects artist they've got at the Beeb at the time. And yeah, they know what they're doing. So there's a lot of talent pool there, actually.
Malcolm James as well. I think there were 3 of them, weren't they? They did four. They're working on 4 episodes each or something. Yeah, I think that was when the models and things were one of the best things in terms of the visual effects. Again, this was down to the research they'd done and looking at making things realistic, no surprises and things like that.
I'd agree that everything looks like it can work. I
mean, Space Station Mir, I think, has just gone up about that time. So, that would have been a lesson in, sort of the modular future of spacecraft and space exploration. So they know where things are going to go. And if you look at the Charles de Gaulle station in it does actually bear a striking resemblance to the International Space Station, which of course won't exist for another decade at that point. They were pretty accurate. I mean, also you've got the space shuttles in the show, that's ferrying them back to Earth and back, and they do look very much like the old HOTOL design, which BAE were working on at the time. Now, the HOTOL never happened, as usual with British technology, it got cancelled by the government. That quest for a single stage to orbit craft, if there were going to be space planes, basically, that is essentially what they would look like.
Yeah, on the Cult of Starcops, they mentioned that Peter Conrad had visited the set and was very impressed, saying it was very realistic and reminiscent of his experiences. And in regards to the shuttle transport scenes, he actually gave them advice on how to make it more realistic, saying, you need to have the hair standing on end floating, and you need to have if they're falling asleep, the hands need to be floating too. So they incorporated his advice there.
And that was good practical, that was realistic advice as well, which I quite like, because he didn't tell them to do something that would be really expensive, or just those kind of little touches.
Yeah, it's the small things sometimes, and just having someone's hair all over the place is a nice touch, because that's one thing you do not tend to see on sci-fi.
So it's created this pretty believable world, and I think it's also quite impressive the number of crimes they managed to come up with in what initially might seem like quite a sort of restrictive sort of scenario.
Well, I enjoy them, but I'm a fan of murder mysteries and cop shows, so I get really into it. And quite funny because I didn't realise till today, but my favourite episodes are all the ones not written by Chris Boucher, weirdly enough. But I really like the ones with the stolen embryos and the twins, and I like the one with the health and safety guy doing investigations, played by Jeffrey Bailden, and everything going wrong. And
how about yourself, Peter? I mean, you're a very experienced writer yourself. How do you think it works as a detective show?
I think it works very well, because I was sort of reminded about Robert Heinlein book, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, where people have to be quite pleasant to each other because you depend on other people to stay alive, and if you annoy people too much, you'll find yourself sort of having your equipment fail or something like that. So the crimes aren't necessarily the sort of ones you'll get on Earth, but a lot of them were like corporate ones or influenced by factors on Earth, going to the moon where they were doing research and things like this to actually change events or research or something like that. So I quite liked, it wasn't so much a personal individual crimes they were solving. Obviously there had to be perpetrators acting on someone's behalf, but a lot of it was sort of this corporate thing that was going on, which I can imagine if you're setting up research facilities on the moon or renting out space, that's when you could start getting illegalities taking place.
Because you can certainly understand that to people on Earth, having something, the moon is, or a space station feels very kind of lawless and outside of sort of the law. You can see the attraction to executives, and there's a good many corrupt executives in this series.
Yes.
So corporate crime is probably one of the main drivers, and the other one is it's just kind of human weaknesses. It's greed for money. It's drug addiction is a feature.
Sorry, there's just, while we're on this topic, there was one point I wanted to raise, which particularly relates to the first episode, where Nathan's very old-fashioned, and everyone considers him old-fashioned because right from the first episode, everyone's just saying, "Well, the computer said this." They said, "Oh, it's just an accident," and Nathan's like, "You've got to go with your gut instincts. You've got to investigate. This is probably a murder." And everyone's saying, "Well, the computer says," and he's like, "Screw the computer." And this is very pertinent to now because this came up in both BBC's Click and Have I Got News For You with different companies. So we had the post office scandal in relation to the Verizon computer system where 736 sub-postmasters were wrongfully prosecuted because of a computer error. And again, it was a case of, well, computer says you did it, so we're going to arrest you. And in regards to what Click was talking about, lots of taxi drivers, private hire drivers were basically fired by Uber because of face recognition software said, "Oh, that's not you in the car, so we've just terminated your contract automatically," and they don't speak, no one interaction there. And we see it all the time with YouTube flagging up videos as inappropriate. For example, Club Penguin videos. I'm not sure what that is. It's a kids thing, but because people were abbreviating it to CP, YouTube's algorithm was saying that's child porn, so we're going to block the videos. And it's just showing there's no human involved. And it was very much a theme in Star Cops with Nathan saying you can't just go by blindly accept what a computer says.
Yeah, and it's predicting exactly what's happening. People are blindly accepting what computers are saying.
Yeah.
Wasn't going to talk about it yet, but we do seem to be straying into this area already. But we need to talk about Box. Box is a remarkable thing, certainly for predicting the future. And it goes right into all this stuff we're talking about with AI.
Yeah, Alexa and Siri.
But also the weird part of Box, which is, why does only Nathan have one?
Wasn't it because of the...
Well, we know why in the script, we know why in the stories he's the only one, but of course, we all have personal assistants basically around with us all the time. Any phone can do a lot of the does, but for some reason in the Star Cops universe, they thought having that kind of power at your fingertips would be something that very few people would end up having.
Yes, it's interesting. They never quite explain why. I can only assume there is some unique bit of its design for some reason, or possibly even Nathan has suppressed, because Box was such a useful device that it seems amazing that it's not being used everywhere else. I can only assume there's something really expensive in its design that sort of limits it.
Box's design, I think, was it comes across as something that might have been a prototype that never got to production, but compared to everything else in the series, it seems decades ahead of its time. And what struck me as odd in the series is that nobody's tried to steal it. I mean, Nathan loses it at one point, I think, in the American space station. And if somebody knew that this thing was really that clever an AI, you'd think they would want to steal it and take it apart and see how it works. So I always think it's very vulnerable the way he carries it around.
I have what I suppose is a fan theory at this point, in that people are surprised by Box, but they're not shocked by it. They don't seem to be like, "Oh my god, what is this amazing space age device?" They're just like, "Oh, you've got something like that. That's neat." And I'm wondering if what we've already been talking about here about AI could actually be a reason. I mean, given how we've got all these problems with mass privacy invasions and data theft and stuff that AI is already involved in our society, maybe there's a moratorium. The UN say, corporations are no longer able to market consumer products based on AI technologies, and maybe Box is a result of that path not taken because they were told you can't produce this anymore. So there are very few devices like it around.
That's certainly a very plausible reason, and that's something I could easily see being used within the series. I suspect nobody ever thought of it because the question hadn't been asked, but yes, it would certainly be a very good plot line for Box, and why there aren't more of them. In fact, you could almost argue he's probably a little bit illegal and has to pretend to be stupider than he actually is when he's with other people.
Yeah, I like that theory a lot, actually, Kevin. And, and I think it's also just worth mentioning there's a fair bit of Aurak in the idea of what Box is. That he kind of draws from all these other computers, and although he's got a different sort of personality, he's more. Whereas Aurak is sort of blatantly rude and cross all the time, Box is he's got a more drier. He's more like Jeeves. Well, the scripts are often excellent. Perhaps a little place where they fall down, and I was going to, what you think about this is the international aspect of the Star Cops world.
I guess the stereotypes, particularly the Americans, it's a bit. I'm going to be honest. I found a bit of the acting on the American episode a bit cringy, on the nose.
I think there are quite a few stereotypes in this series.
Yeah.
I mean,
I think the worst one was the one with the Italians.
Yes.
Not to be opened for.
This case not to be opened.
That's it. Yeah. I thought that was like cliche city.
There's particularly the bit where Nathan is pursued by a mafia hitman.
Yeah.
Who he couldn't look more like a half. I mean, if you were going to a fancy dress party as a mafia hitman, you'd dress like that man.
Yeah.
It is kind of unintentionally funny, and yes, the Italians are, on the whole, they're all a bit corrupt and sleazy.
Yeah.
It is an old complaint of the show. The Germans are cold and logical. Americans are arrogant and paranoid. The Italians are competent, corrupt. Arabs are brutal and xenophobic. Japanese women are all submissive and weak, and the men are sneaky and scheming. So it does drift into some uncomfortable territory. I mean, yeah, it's an 80s show, but they do seem to fall back on some lazy stereotypes.
They do.
It is interesting that the character of Anna Shu was introduced by the producer into the mix. Rather, she wasn't part of Chris Boucher's original design. And interestingly, he said that one of the reasons he didn't like the character, he had nothing against the actress or her performance, but he didn't like the character, was that because he didn't know anything about Japanese culture, and he didn't think he'd be able to do it justice. And I think, unfortunately, that does show, as you say, Kevin, it's a very Western view of what Japanese people are like.
Yes, it was very feudal, even. I would say Japanese feudal. The whole company set up and the submissiveness.
Well, we're going to say that more recently we've changed our minds on the Japanese representation, because we felt like they're almost like Shun and her boss. They felt like the characters had come out of a Yakuza game, because we've been playing this last year, and we're like, this is how they are in that world. And there is a thing in Japan of you join a company, it becomes your family, and it's a job for life kind of thing. So it was kind of realistic in that respect. And
I suppose for the time, especially, you could argue that. I don't know. Is it still like that? I don't know.
It still is a thing over there, where the graduates en masse dress in a particular uniform for recruitments, and there's a big mass recruitment thing going on, and then they join that company, and it does become where they work for.
It's who they socialise with. They even have like company anthems that they have to sing each morning and stuff like that. So,
and they still all socialise after work together as a drinks thing, because they have you behave after work than you do during work. And
to be fair to Anna Shun, though, she does kind of thwart a stereotype in the end, because she is actually picked in the plot because she is a bit of a naive wallflower. Obviously, you know, her boss is using her because she's not going to ask questions or come up with anything that will, you know, hurt company interests. But over time, though, she does show herself to be a much stronger and wiser character, and I quite like her the development of her friendship with Colin Davis, who initially is fairly racist and dismissive. And they end up being mates, you know. They end up laughing and joking together on stuff. So I do like that there is a change there.
There is this sort of element of a family of its own being created within Star Cops, that you get these very disparate people from very different backgrounds, and slowly you can see in season 2 they're going to be gelling together as a kind of family group, because unlike a lot of police forces on Earth, they're actually in space, and they have the same isolation surrounded by this, you know, huge vacuum and around them. That's going to bring them closer together and depend on each other a bit more. One mistake can kill you, so you're gonna want to know there's people covering your back.
Well, as Colin Davis describes the Star Cops, wave some bloody strays.
Yeah.
I feel like by episode 7, A Double Life, it feels like everything's come together because we've got Shun, we've got Krivenko's joined the cast, and it just feels like everything, all the pieces are in place by that point. It's so frustrating that we get 3 episodes where all the gang's together finally, and it's just cancelled. It's like shot in the foot then. It's very frustrating at that point, because it just hangs together so well, those last 3 episodes. And
yeah, there's a big learning curve, I suppose, partly for the series, but also for the Star Cops themselves. They're having to learn how to be police in space, and some of them don't come from a police background particularly. They come from engineering and medicine and so on, but they're learning from each other and learning how to be policemen in space. They're sort of writing the book as they go along.
In fact, that's seems a very we seem to have moved quite naturally into talking about the characters. Started with Nathan Spring, as played by David Calder.
I'm aware Chris Boucher wrote the character originally to be a sort of young maverick, always at loggerheads with his boss kind of thing, and I'm really glad the production ignored him, to be honest, because David Calder is a hell of a steady hand. I've always found him one of the most underappreciated actors.
He is kind of that sort of rock solid foundation of it all, and he hits the right, I think, level between kind of being a kind of a tough cop, but also being this sort of patriarch center of it. There's a line in An Instinct for Murder earlier on where someone describes Nathan Spring as he looks like the kind of guy who punch your teeth out and then criticize you for mumbling. And I remember not liking that line. I thought, oh, that's a line that Chris Boucher has written and he can't bring himself to delete it, even though it doesn't actually kind of fit the character anymore. But it's such a funny line, he can't get rid of it. But actually, watching it this last time, it's not actually said by someone who really knows Nathan. It's said by the traffic controller, and that's his impression. In fact, he almost kind of says it as a joke. So it now makes more sense to me, that line, because, as I said, a fairly, not cuddly, perhaps is the wrong word, but he is a very likable.
He's not easily intimidated. He expects a lot of his people, but he'll support them 100%. He's like the ideal boss in many ways. And he's played superbly. I think even Chris Boucher sort of praised. He said he had no problems with David Calder in the end playing that part because he did it so well.
It's interesting as well that they chose to recruit actors and who've had a background in crime TV rather than sci-fi, and this happened again with Big Finish getting the main writer from it was an ex-police officer. So I think that works out well for the show.
Definitely. Opposite, introduced in the first episode, we have David Farrou, as played by Eric Ray Evans, and I think he makes a good impression.
Whenever I read reviews of the show, Eric Ray Evans, he's always regarded as the weak link of the regular cast. But I must admit, I mean, I still find him quite watchable. Actually, I don't really have a problem with him. His range isn't stellar, as to be said, but he's not wrong in the role. He works. And the character's interesting, though a little sidelined later on. I think it's because we get a lot of him in the first few episodes because he's like real Starcop we meet at first, but once there's the ensemble, he does get shuffled into the background a little.
Well, when we first meet him, he's coming from a position of being an established Starcop and everyone taking the piss out of them. They're calling them Starcops, and I guess just used to at that point not being taken very seriously. As long as he shakes things up and is like, no, we're going to do this properly and we're not going to let these people mess us around.
Well, they tease an interesting backstory for him, don't they? I mean, he was formerly an American astronaut, but resigned after some sort of scandal, political, we assume, and was immediately rehired by the Europeans. And he just has this sort of aura of being this sort of principled and incorruptible guy and probably perfect Starcop material. But we never get to the bottom of all that.
No, and sadly, in the last episode, Eric Ray Evans got shingles, so he couldn't be in the last
Wasn't in it, was he?
No, so I think Kenzie took over his role with that, having the radical background, but it is mentioned before that David Theroux does have the radical background, so I think he would have been the character who knew that journalist.
That would have made a lot more sense, actually. Because I always thought it was a bit odd that this character of Powell Kenzie was a political radical.
Yeah, because it doesn't fit him at all, does it?
No.
And it wasn't Chris Boucher who rewrote it. It was David Calder and Trevor Cooper who rewrote that because there was the strikes going on and Boucher wasn't around, and they were just like, someone's got to rewrite this. They were working on the hoof with that.
Yeah.
Mind if I remember right, Rupert Murdoch, everyone's least favourite corporate user.
There's a lot to choose from now.
He in his youth was a member of a socialist organisation at university. So, people do cross the floor, especially in Australia, it seems.
Yeah, that's it. And we were talking about stereotypes. To some extent, Pal Kenzie is another stereotype. She's a bolshy Australian, and we'd already had. If you're a science fiction fan, you might well be aware of another bolshy Australian woman who's been in Doctor Who not so long ago.
Because they're all bolshy.
Yeah. And again, I suppose that you have to class that as a stereotype. But she does play well against Nathan Spring, doesn't she? I mean, the two of them, I mean, they're like poles apart, but you get this sort of synergy between them in the end that they work well as a team. I could see them actually, if people were to pair up on the force, like they have partners, I think those two could really work well together. That conflict between them would generate a lot of ideas and possibilities.
I think I agree with you. I think, although I'm glad we got this family, if you were going to do something with just two of them, that's the obvious partnership between them. And I think Linda Newton does a good job. And she's actually very good at doing that kind of panicking as well and being fearful. Going back to this case not to be opened for a million years, the bits where they're exploring the spaceship and finding these desiccated bodies all around is I think a lot of the effectiveness of that is the way that she plays it.
Yeah.
Well, she and Spring both have that thing that they have this aura they give off, this confidence, this thing of being in control, but both of them are actually a hell of a lot more vulnerable than they prefer to let on. And, Nathan has to go through all his dealing with space, or rather not dealing with being in space.
Losing her name, his partner. She was murdered, and he's recovering from that. And
so he shows a lot of vulnerability, but then it shows that she's not what her image is either.
I thought the show was kind of setting them up to be some kind of couple
Yeah,
eventually. I thought
I was getting the will they, won't they kind of vibe.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree with that.
Although Badger denies that was ever going to happen.
Ah,
Chris
interesting.
Badger. I think he just wanted them kind of spark off each other, which I think if they would become romantically engaged, I think they'd have to stop working together, which
They'd be
would be a shame. Yeah.
Exactly. It would sort of cause too many problems.
When we meet Kenzie, she is someone who's got lost in the murk, and she tries to extort money from undercover Colin Davis, so and gets caught red-handed as dirty. And I suppose over the series, Nathan manages originally just wanting to be rid of her, but by the end of the show, actually manages to bring out not only a good cop but an honest one, and I think that's a great character progression for her.
I guess her corruption at the beginning was still over from that period when the Star Cops were all volunteers and not taken seriously at all.
Well, I suspect she signed up for the just for the places it might be able to get her and the people it might get her to be able to talk to, rather than having any interest in upholding the law.
The producer had suggested a different title for Star Cops. He wanted to call it something like High Frontiers or something. That is a Wild West almost still.
Yeah.
You've got Nathan trying to impose law in space.
Yeah. What do people think of that title?
I don't like it. I mean,
which title? The actual title?
High Frontier.
No.
It's not a Western.
No, it's not. It's a cop show.
It's not like the Wild West. People are very well behaved. People need to depend on each other to survive. There aren't gunfights. No, it just wouldn't have been. Just wouldn't have worked. I don't think it's just not right.
It might have been that years before in space, but not at the current state they're at where we're seeing it.
The one character we've not talked about that must be addressed is Colin Davis,
Yes,
played by Trevor Cooper.
Yes, he's a bit of a dinosaur, even by the standards of the series, I think, but certainly by today's standards. But he does fit into Spring's idea of not having computer slaves. And his most important role, of course, is to make us laugh. He's the comedy elements. He's kind of like a loyal dog, isn't he?
Yes.
He'd probably die defending Nathan. But at the same time, Nathan's got to shout at him all the time to heal. And you can't let him near any bitches, that's for sure. So yeah, I think he adds colour to the series. I think actually he's one of my favourite characters, if not the favourite character, possibly after Nathan Spring. But yeah, that's my opinion on him.
Yeah, Trevor Cooper he's such an enormously likeable actor. Anyway, I think maybe there's a fair bit of Trevor in there, but yeah, he never fails to be entertaining on screen.
I know an interview Trevor Cooper saying Davis isn't a diplomat and it's best to keep him on moon base where his strengths lie and not send him off undercover or anything like that, because as soon as they do, he gets caught, like in Japan.
Yes.
Which I think
Yeah, I think
he's not very subtle, is he, when he tries to sneak his way in?
No, he's not. I mean, it's interesting that when he's introduced in Conversations with the Dead, he's actually quite a nasty character at first. I mean, he's investigating the murder of Spring's fiancée. He very quickly sort of softens into that much more likable character in the remaining episodes.
I think it sort of reflects his insecurity as a police officer, that he knows he's not very bright, and he knows he's been put in charge of that case to basically make a mess of it. And he's sort of snarling and barking at people because he doesn't know what else to do about it. I think he's putting up a pretense of being a competent officer, but he knows he's skating on thin ice.
It's addressed in the Big Finish audios, because in the second episode he puts his foot in it with being sexist and racist and stuff and to Priya, and he basically apologizes and says that, when I'm in a situation where things aren't as I expect, I just blurt stuff out and sorry, I don't mean it.
It's a defense mechanism.
It is, yeah. That's what it is, and he's sorry about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a nice revelation when we discover he's been married 5 times.
And, I'm amazed that he could find 5 women to marry him, but
well, he's very cuddly.
Yeah, I suppose so. It's not my taste, but
There's Kravenko.
We haven't really talked about him.
We haven't really, and that's a yes. I do apologise. And in fact, I didn't include him in my summary at the start. But I feel that is unfair to Jonathan Adams, who does, to me, a decent job on Kravenko.
Yeah, he's very convincing as a Russian.
Very hairy Russian. Yeah.
Yes, but that's, I suppose, another stereotype. Of scientific genius Russians.
There's quite a bit of topple going on in there. There's 2 ways you could go with that part. You either have someone who's really antagonistic towards the Star Cops and always kind of getting in the way, or you have the way he's gone with it, which is that much more a supportive patriarch, but who sometimes gets caught up between Earth and what the Star Cops want to do.
Yeah, he can put pressure on them, but he does it in a very subtle way. And it's almost like Nathan is sort of feeling under pressure because he feels he has to support him, because he obviously appreciates, they could have a lot worse than him as the person in charge.
Yeah, I suppose in many ways both of them have in common that they're in very precarious roles.
One of the controversial things about Star Cops has been its opening titles, or more specifically, the music of the opening titles. I was wondering what people think about the song "It Won't Be Easy" by Justin Hayward.
Well, I like the song.
I must admit, it is actually a song I'm rather fond of after all these years. And I'm not a Moody Blues fan or anything, but no, it's it's all right. It's in the end it works,
and it goes with the imagery as well. I like the imagery, like the the spacesuit footprint thing and the moon stuff.
If I was going to pick a fight with the music, it would be more some of the incidental choices, which are at times a bit bizarre, somewhat ill-fitting. But no, I have no problem with the theme. I know some people just like it moves them to be nauseous, but no, it's not an issue I have.
My feeling about the song is I love the song. I've actually got it on my playlist with Alexa. I really do like the song. I'm not entirely convinced it's a good theme song for Star Cops. I mean, the song itself tells a story. I mean, it's that the song tells a story. So you end up cutting off the story at some point as it plays the theme. So I think something without words would have been better. Something that was maybe catchy, associated, made you think of Star Cops. But I'm not convinced that it was the best thing to do as a theme tune.
I know John Owls won't forgive me if I didn't mention that when we first saw Star Trek Enterprise, me and him were like, hey, they're ripping off the Star Cops intro. There was a certain stylistic similarity between them.
I like the Enterprise opening. He deliberately chose that song because he wanted to try and draw in non-sci-fi fans. He thought the easy listening tune would draw people in.
Yeah, it does belong more to the detective genre of than science fiction. So I don't think it would come as a surprise that all have liked a second season here.
That's
on the panel,
right? Yeah,
of that. And how do you think it would have gone in a second series?
Well, they were setting up for moving to Mars, setting up a police station on Mars, and presumably the Martian colonies or bases are starting to develop there. So we would have had stories in a similar vein on Mars, and possibly then this sort of back and forth between the Moon, Earth, Mars, and various space stations. I did wonder if that's one thing that frightened the BBC, because you're creating a whole new element then. You're going to need new actors, new special effects, some new sets. That might well have, they saw that coming and they probably thought, oh, this is going to cost a lot of money. Do we really want to do that?
I'm very sad about one of the episodes that didn't get made, which was Death on the Moon, because that was going to be like an Agatha Christie style murder mystery on the moon where we set number of suspects, and I think we'd have got more more stories like that in a second season.
Well, I think I'm getting a sense if they were going to commit to the Mars idea, it might actually have helped production in some ways, because you would have then had a certain set of characters on the moon or on Earth as needed, and then you've got some characters who are very much stuck on Mars, and then you could have episodes shifting focus, which would then help, because you didn't need the same people in every week. Could have more strands of production going on at the same time. But yes, I could certainly see an exec looking at that and thinking, this is just we can lose a lot of money on that.
Yeah.
I was reading that at the time the BBC press screening for Star Cops emphasised, it's not sci-fi, it's a realistic cop show. And this that in the early.
Well, it can be both.
Exactly, and I thought that kind of shoots itself in the foot when something says it's not science fiction, when it's, to any kind of lay person, I think looking at it, they would say that's science fiction.
It's obviously science fiction, isn't it? And it's like they're apologising for science fiction, which sort of reflects more about the people who are saying it than it does about the programme.
As you can tell, we're all fans here, and I'd like to wrap up this podcast with us all nominating our favourite episode out of these 9 episodes. So, would you like to begin, Peter?
It was difficult. It was between Conversations with the Dead. I really didn't see that ending coming. Had me fooled about, the whole business with murdering, was it Lee Jones? And the sort of machinations of the British intelligence service trying to get onto the American space station, and Little Green Men and Other Martians. And I remember when I saw that, I got really excited by that, because the title, first of all, and then that scene where the spaceman or the astronaut on the Martian surface finds something is what we've been looking for. Oh, great, there's going to be aliens in this one. But there aren't, of course. And so I was set up very nicely. And then of course, it came back to being a normal con. I think I'm going to go with Conversations with the Dead, because it was almost like a James Bond type thriller, in that they were willing to kill people as a ploy to get some information and steal data.
That's interesting. How about yourself, Rebecca? What would you do?
I think my favourite's a Double Life, which is the one about the stolen embryos, and the what it turned out to be. I've said twins earlier. I actually meant clones. So we had 2 people know about the second person, so everyone's accusing this pianist of stealing the embryos when he plainly couldn't, because he was doing a concert, and turns out he'd been cloned. And I really like the one, Other People's Secrets, which is the one where you've got Jeffrey Bailden coming on board the station, doing some kind of safety inspection, and everything's going wrong, all kinds of glitches and explosions and things, just terrible things happening, and he's thinking he's getting angry, saying this place is a mess, and it turns out it's him all along.
Yeah.
And how about yourself, Kevin?
I mean, I could either just duplicate what other people said, but I thought I'll pick Trivial Games and Paranoid Pursuits, due to the ambition of the story. And I really love Space Station Ronald Reagan. I think it's just a really impressive and very believable first step for an artificial gravity space station. Again, they just put a lot of design work into bringing into reality, and the actual mysteries quite good as well. It's
Graham Harper did some really good camera work.
Yeah, there is some
we
lovely camera
liked,
work, yeah.
where it followed Nathan and the American guy, and they were walking along, and the camera just kept following them as they were climbing up the ladder to the next level, and it was just all one shot.
Downtrend the camera so they can just keep on moving with them.
It's really good, that.
We're also on similar lines, Peter, because I was going to nominate those two episodes. The Conversations with the Dead for its ingenuity, and Little Green Men, because I think it's it's a really good plot of an idea. It's got epic. But for the variety, underneath them, I would actually go for An Instinct for Murder, because I think it's a very good pilot episode that sets it up very well. I think the two crimes, the ingenuity of the two crimes being investigated.
The first 5 minutes of that episode are just really impressive. Actually, I find the intercutting between space and the guy swinging the leg.
Yeah, I did like that myself.
Well, I've enjoyed this a lot, and I hope you all have as well.
Well, I certainly have. Yes.
It's been fascinating talking to you, and it's been great actually to talk with you, Peter, because although we've corresponded over the years, this is the first time we've got to actually talk with each other.
Yes, I think it is.
So that's been quite nice. And then I must say, whilst I was preparing this, I was looking up on your Peter Grehen has an excellent website about his work. I was really interested to see that you'd written for Commando.
Yes, that's right. I needed something to make money. So, yes, I've written a series of Commando books. I haven't done it for a while, but recently I started coming up with some more ideas, and I've been in touch with them recently, so they've given me the okay to send some ideas to them. But it's spinning all these plates that's the problem.
Oh, are you working on anything else at the moment?
Yeah, I'm writing the next in the series for my House of Usher series of books. The first one was Dead Man Dancing, House of Usher's Dead Man Dancing. This is the Performing Arts Centre in space, and hence the Ushers. There's two undercover Ushers there. One is actually a Usher, and the other one is an ice cream droid, who's actually a much more advanced droid than your typical ice cream droid, but he's very bad-tempered about being stuck into this job where he has to give ice cream to people all the time. But the second story is called Yellow Mists and Cobalt Sands, and this is where they go down to the planet's surface that the Performing Arts Centre is orbiting around, and they have a series of adventures there.
Sounds very intriguing. Well, I must say thank you very much again for giving me your time to talk about Star Cops.
It's been my pleasure.
It's been fun.
It's been fun. Thank you for inviting us on, Gareth.
So it just leaves me to say to you, thank you for listening, and hope you'll join us all very soon. So goodbye for now. You've been listening to Very British Futures, hosted and produced by Gareth Preston, with guests Peter Grehen, Kevin Hiley, and Dr. Rebecca Wray. If you'd like to find out more about Peter Grehen's work, then visit petergrehenwriter.weebly.com. And if you'd like to watch some of Kevin Hiley's films, then check out westlakefilms.blogspot.com. You might even see me in some of them. You can follow us on Twitter @FuturesVery, or visit garethpreston.blog for more information. Join us next time for Fred.